Scripture reading comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. And I'm reading from the NLT version. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to another, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it." Then he ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
I'm Chris Bryant, the lead pastor, and I've been away from the pulpit for 3 weekends, so I'm itching to get back. It's good to be back preaching. Of course, I was 2 weeks in Nicaragua. One of those, I get to worship with you, of course, but was not preaching. Then last weekend, as you all were looking at the Christian core value of family priority, somewhat ironically, I was gone in College Corner, Ohio, visiting my mother, and surprise birthday for her, and just what a joy it was to be with my family on that weekend. But I'm back, and we are continuing our study of these core values, 8 core values of the most dynamic, most vibrant, most effective Christians all over the world. And we haven't been going in exact order. Doesn't matter. Christian the Core doesn't require us to do that. You remember that Joy was here, one of the co-founders of ILI, International Leadership Institute, just a couple weeks ago, and she preached on one of the core values, and it's fine. It's really not about the order. It's about knowing all of them together. If anything, the first core value of intimacy with God is the most important, the foundational one, and then you can really go from anywhere from there. All right, today we begin a 2-week look at the core value of stewardship. And tonight I want to talk to you about the financial stewardship, very, very specifically. And I want to introduce the message talking about 4 things that deeply influence financial stewardship, that are tie-ins, that are connections, that are concepts, that are sub-values when we come to financial stewardship. And the first one is fear. Fear influences our financial stewardship or the lack thereof. Fear is a dominant emotion in our life. We face fears all the time. We contend with fear. We fight against fear. And we have to learn in some ways to live with fear. Certain aspects of fear, of course, are healthy. Growing up, we learn limitations based on fear, either fear of punishments or fear of being hurt or fear of something bad happening to us as a result of our actions. And as we become adults and experience the entirety of the adult world, our lives become open to all kinds of new fears and new levels and more pervasive forms of fears that we learned as children and as teenagers. Fears of failure, fears of never being good enough, never being smart enough, handsome enough, sexy enough, fears of not being accepted, fears of letting others down, fears about our health and our safety or that of our loved ones, especially our children. As adults, we face fears of bankruptcy, fears of financial ruin, fears about our country or our children's future, fears about our world, social fears, fears of moral decay, fears about our ecological collapse, so whether or not we kill the planet before our grandchildren or great-grandchildren are here. And some of us, based on our personality, fight fears more than others. I mean, all of us contend with these sorts of things, but based on our personality, some of us entertain fear often in our thoughts. It's part of how we're hardwired, and it's a really big part of our life. And so we really have to figure out how to deal with fear and rid ourselves of it, because we find it sprouts its ugly head all the time. We find it's overwhelming to us. It consumes us. It creeps. Fear creeps into every relationship and every action in our lives and every decision, or almost every decision. And from that, it can become paralyzing to us, stop us right in our track. Despite our desire to want to go forward, to do things, fear can keep us stuck right where we are, in bad relationships, in a bad job, in a bad decision, in a bad habit. Fear can keep us without the pleasure of having an active faith, a faith that steps out, a faith that risks, a faith that trusts and believes. Now that brings us to the second thing I want to preface this sermon with, and that's belief. Belief influences our financial stewardship, and our financial stewardship actually reflects our beliefs. Our actual beliefs, not just the ones we say we believe, Belief is a powerful force in our life that can come against fear. But of course, that all depends on exactly what you believe and how you believe it. Now, at the beginning of the year, we did a series on this church on the Apostles' Creed called I Believe. And I really liked that series. It was about the Apostles' Creed and how that is the minimal. The Apostles' Creed represents the most basic set of beliefs for a Christian. We entered worship. We started worship off with the Apostles' Creed by video tonight. A Christian can believe more than what is in the Apostles' Creed, but a Christian cannot believe less than the Creed. The Apostles' Creed begins, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Do you believe this? Sometimes the problem with belief is that we keep it merely a concept. We keep it merely a mental construct that either we agree with or disagree with, but we don't ever actually apply it. People even get upset about their beliefs. I'm really upset. I argue about my beliefs, And yet those same people at times, I have found as a pastor, some of the people that get the most upset about a certain belief or this belief struggle at times to come up with a good answer when you ask them, how does that belief practically affect your daily life? They struggle with that. How does the fact that you believe, right now, I want you to think about that. How does the fact that if you say you believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, practically affect your life? What difference does it make? What difference does it make? Who cares? And why should they care? What in your life, not just your words, although words are very important, We got to know, we got to talk. We got to witness, we got to share. But what other than your words in your life would convince someone that you do in fact believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth? Belief influences our financial decisions, sisters and brothers, and our financial decisions, our financial stewardship reflects our actual beliefs. Fear, belief, and then this third concept, contentment. It's often connected to financial stewardship. Contentment is a critical piece to any and every explanation in the Bible about financial stewardship. I'm so Bibled up, I have to admit it. I'm so preachered up, I'm so churched up that I can't even hear the word contentment anymore without thinking what Paul wrote in the Philippians. And that's just the truth. I've just been in it so long. Anytime I hear the word contentment, I just immediately goes to Philippians chapter 4. And Paul writing them saying, I have learned to be content. I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Contentment is precisely that. It is being emotionally, spiritually okay, really and truly okay, despite the circumstances we find ourselves in. It is peaceful, and it is also the word contentment, perhaps blasé, unless you have experienced personally the power of contentment yourself. I've experienced it. Not all the time, but there have been moments in my life when things were at the very worst. And when they're at the very worst, you discover just how important Jesus is. You really don't know how important Jesus is. You really don't know how important having Jesus is until Jesus is all you have. And then you discover the power and the truth of contentment. When you find yourself in such places, then that contentment stays with you. Deep inside. And it's not all the time there because you're a human being. You sin and have problems with your attitudes. But once you experience it, it resurfaces time and time again as you go with the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of life. Contentment comes through a process of maturing, which necessitates experiencing pain, sometimes soul-wrenching pain, and yet also having enough good times in your life to realize that life can be good. It may not always be good, but there are moments. And it's through that turbulent emotional ocean with the help of good spirituality that you come to a place of being grateful for whatever you have. Grateful for whatever you have, whenever it is that you have it. It's not that you don't need more or couldn't be blessed by more, because you probably could. And it's not that you really could afford to live without something or live with less, as if you've gotten enough now, and now I have enough, I can be content. It doesn't work that way. Contentment is beyond the reach of such physical things. Contentment is a state of transcendence. Spiritually, you're okay, really okay. And there's a simpleness to that and a joyfulness to it of recognizing all the goods. This is good, this is good, this is good. Recognizing all the goods in your life, appreciating them, and knowing that every good gift comes from above. In those times, you're experiencing genuine contentment. And then I want to mention trust. Because such contentment necessitates a strong layer of trust. Fear, belief, contentment, trust, all these things are wrapped around financial stewardship in the church, biblical truth. Trust, ours in God and God's trust in us, is foundational. Foundational. Trust is a powerful and wonderful word. Trust is especially powerful when we're talking in the church, in spirituality. Trust and faith are closely related. And in fact, sometimes it's better to use the word trust. Because faith, like belief in general, can become, too conceptual, too sterile, too religious to have any real bite in our life. But trust comes from the dirt, Trust is raised in pain and joy of actual relationships, where the value of the word is discovered by both its benefits experienced in real flesh and blood, and also where its brokenness, where trust is violated by those same real flesh and blood relationships. Trust is an incredibly important part of stewardship, biblically speaking. Our trust in God, and listen, God's trust in us. It's mutual. Jesus tells a story about this. It's the story we read. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells this great story, this parable. And it is a great story, but it's not a very nice story. It's a great story, like all his parables, because it's complex. It's wonderfully complex, wonderfully nuanced. You can't get it all out of one reading. You know, there's always more to glean. So it's wonderful. It's good in that way. All of his parables like that. But, you know, if you get into it, and it elicits a response of wonder and a reaction. Maybe not always a good reaction, but a reaction nonetheless. But it's not nice. The story we read today is not nice. Not in the sense that, you know, we think of nice stories of Jesus. You know, stories that even unchurched people, non-church people might refer to. It's not like the prodigal son. It's not like the Good Samaritan, all right? No, here Jesus says some harsh things. And if we're not careful, we'll actually make it more harsh than what it's meant to be. Nevertheless, Jesus does get upset and sternly speaks about two different things in his ministry. According to the four Gospels, there's two things that make Jesus upset and causes him to speak sternly. The first is religious hypocrisy, especially in the form of when God's people express judgment when they should be expressing grace. Makes him very upset. And then there's this other thing, and that's wastefulness. Wastefulness gets Jesus upset, and it causes him to speak very stern things. He doesn't like it when we waste God's goods. You know, all those goods. Good, this is good, that good, this is good. All those goods I mentioned before or was referring to. When we waste the resources that God has given us, all the good things that are at our disposal, our gifts, our talents, our time, our finances, when we waste those, when we mismanage those, when we have the wrong priority about them, and Jesus tells lots of parables and stories about such, he gets upset. Now, today's parable is one of those examples. And you heard the story earlier, and hopefully you caught the gist of it. If not, I'll cover it here very briefly again. The drift is essentially, there's this really wealthy guy, and he's going to go on a trip. And part of the way he's going to prepare for the trip is to liquidate his assets. That's how he's going to prepare for the long trip. He's certainly got enough resources. He's going to make the trip on his own, but he's got stuff back at home that he's got to get rid of. And so he liquidates his IRA, liquidates his 401k, gets rid of his CDs, right? He's got 3 servants, and he's going to give it to them all. They're going to take care of it while he's gone. And so he gives each of them an extraordinary amount of money. Now, we read in the New Living Translation today, which is the version we use, and I like it. I like it because of the certain phrases that it chooses to use to interpret the story, including the visual bags of money. I like how NLT describes that he gives bags of money to these 3 servants. In this case, it's silver. It could be gold or silver, but in this case, they chose silver. 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another person, another servant, and then 1 bag of silver to a third. Now, some versions of the Bible translate these coins. 5 coins, 2 coins, 1 coin. And I don't like that translation. I don't like it because when you and I think of coins, we think of pocket change. And that misses the point of this parable. It's an overly literal translation, but it's overly literal. You see, because a talent is a significance of weight. It's not a currency. It's the largest ancient Near Eastern weight classification. It's the heaviest weight classification. And as best as we can think about it or know about it, it's at least 66 pounds. Now, some mark it at 75 pounds, some mark it as 120 pounds. But at the very least, especially if you're talking about silver, it's 66 pounds. And the talent was the actual measurement itself was a round object, a gigantic round mass. And so that's why I don't like the coin idea. A talent coin was this huge, massive thing. So I don't like the word coin because it's misleading. This is a lot of money, okay? This story is about an incredibly wealthy guy that gives, at the very least, 330 pounds of silver to one of his servants, and gives another 130 some pounds to another servant, and finally, 66 or so pounds of silver to his third servant. Or in other words, 1/8 of his fortune goes to one, 1/4 of his fortune goes to another, and finally the rest he gives to the third servant. Now, the enormity of this story would have been liked. People would have enjoyed the story in the time of Jesus because nobody had this kind of money. Very, very few. I mean, not only did they not have it, not only did they have very little material resources, they didn't know anybody who did, not personally at least. This is a fun story. This guy just hands over a fortune to his 3 servants, trusting it in their good hands. Now, obviously, he doesn't judge these servants as equal. He doesn't split it up equally. He gives one to one to another. You see, he divides it up as he has reasons for doing. And as it turns out, his reasoning is correct. Now, the point of the story, though, isn't captured until after the 3rd servant is revealed as being faithless. It's just a good story up until then. But then once the 3rd servant is revealed as faithless, then it starts, we can start making sense of all the other details of the story. The 3rd servant, who is given the least, does the least with it. In fact, he goes out and digs a hole and drops the silver in it. I want you to picture that. Get him in your mind, 66 pounds of silver. Are you imagining this guy? He goes out, finds some place where he thinks is safe, digs a hole, drops it in, covers it up. Safekeeping. For whom? Well, I wonder about that. And so begins the power of the parable. We relate to the servant. Of the 3 servants, we like this guy. That's where the parable works. Because we relate. We're afraid. Our lives are full of fear. What's this guy? He says, well, I'm afraid. Boy, do we get that. Making decisions based on fear. Who can't understand this guy being paralyzed by fear, as supposedly he was? And if we go there, if we agree with him, if we relate to the point and say, hey, that's just like me, I'm full of fear too, then the master, the rich, wealthy master, he kind of becomes a tyrant, doesn't he? How could he be so cruel? Where's the compassion? Where's the understanding? Didn't the servant do right by not losing your money? What if he tried to do something with it and lost it all? What would have happened to him then? As it turns out, the worst thing that could have happened does anyway. So he should have gambled with it. Right? Come on. He gets thrown into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. I told you this wasn't a nice story. But before you get too upset or anxious about how this heartless, wealthy master is, I want you to imagine when you've possibly clenched your teeth. When are there times when you've clenched your teeth over and over again? Now, we might clench our teeth once in pain. That's true. But to clench our teeth over and over again doesn't mean we're in pain. It means we're mad. It means we're really angry. We clench our teeth, we gnash our teeth when we knew better. I knew better. I knew better. I knew it. We clench our teeth. He is thrown into that place of reflection where we knew better. And now I have to live with the consequences. I knew it. And I have to live with it. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. In fact, part of what I think makes the rich, wealthy man call this 3rd servant wicked, he calls him wicked, is how this 3rd servant describes the master. The master uses this servant's own words against him. The master judges him by the state of his own heart. He says, so you knew I was a harsh man, did you? And he's not confessing that he's a harsh man. He's just saying, so that's what you think of me, huh? You think I'm a harsh man? You think I expected you to do something with this? Well, then let your own words be judgment. If you knew, why did you do something? This is ridiculous. The servant sticks his own foot in his mouth, confessing what he should have done in the very excuse he was making for not doing it. Well, furthermore, I'm not so ready to believe in this guy's innocence. I know we want to relate to him because we're so full of fear. But then again, we're also full of other stuff too, you know. And I've been pastoring long enough to know people who appear one way, even good people, at times can be very, very awful and different kinds of people in another scenario, another situation. So I'm picturing this guy, he's digging a hole, right? And he's going to bury the silver. And I think, wait a minute. I can't think of a single story where a person buries a treasure when they don't think it's theirs. You don't bury treasure that's not yours. You bury your treasure. When you win it, when you steal it, when you inherit it, that's when you bury it, because it's yours. And you intend to keep it. You don't bury treasure that isn't yours. This third servant says, the master's gone. He's going on a long trip. He's probably not coming back. He says, mine, mine, mine. Finally got my retirement right here in reserves. I mean, it is this third servant. It's the third servant that says the wealthy master is a hard man. But the other two don't say this. In fact, they seem anxious when the master comes and says, I want to see what you've done with this huge gift I gave you, with this huge opportunity. What an opportunity. They come running. They're excited. There's absolutely no hint whatsoever that they're reluctant, that they're scared, that they're fearful. No, they come running. And the scripture says he's excited to see, he's full of praise for them both. Clearly, the guy's loaded because he's given 5 bags of money and 2 bags and 1 bag. And he says to both the one that had 5 and turned it into 10, and the one that had 2 and turned it into 4, he says this to both of them. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. Guy's loaded. He's really not worried about it. So why did he do it? Other than to give them an opportunity. An opportunity to feel the success he's had. To feel the wonder of life that he knows is there. I mean, he wants to give that to them. After all, he trusts them with his money. Fear and belief can be dominant forces in our life and dominant excuses at the same time. Fear and belief can play huge roles in determining our actions, and at the same time we can use them as absolute crutches in order to do nothing. I asked you at the beginning of the sermon if you believe that God is the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. I asked you to reflect how your day-to-day activities would justify such a belief. And now I want you to look at these statements, and I want you to think about which one best reflects how you feel about things. My money and what I give is my business. How much of my money should I give to God? How much of God's money should I give back to him? How much of God's money do I dare keep for myself? You know, when it comes to Christian financial stewardship, the first principle to come to believe and apply is that God owns it all anyway. Christians believe God is the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth and all that is within it. Which means as a Christian, I believe my house, my cars, my stuff, my clothes, my savings account, my retirement funds, it all really belongs to God anyway. And the reason I believe this is because all that stuff and everything else in my life that I didn't list comes from God either directly or indirectly through the earth, through his creation, and how that is all produced. And secondly, I believe this because I don't get to keep any of it. I mean, stuff breaks, stuff wears out, stuff runs out. Eventually, it's going to be somebody else's anyway. I mean, it's only a matter of time. In each case, no matter what material thing I'm talking about that I somehow or other own, it won't be mine forever. I mean, sometimes it's not even mine as long as I think it's supposed to be. I mean, things break, they wear out, they run out, they need to be replaced, they don't last, including my own body. Which means eventually things I take the greatest care of. I got a 79 Olds Cutlass. Some of you have seen it. I love it. It's awesome. It's my first car. I like that thing. Isaiah has claimed it. We'll see. It's mine. No, it's not. I mean, it is, but how long? How long? Right? Christians believe in this seriously. We take this belief very seriously. God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, everything is in it. And if you consider yourself a Christian, then you have to take seriously which one of these statements is closest to your heart. If the national statistics prove correct in our congregation, if they prove correct for all the people that call us their church home, somewhere between 30 to 50% of everybody that calls us their, not just the folks we see every week, but everybody that calls us their church home, 30 to 50% relate best to that first statement. My money and what I give is my business. And if that's you, you are so ticked off right now. You're so disappointed that you came to church. You're so disappointed you came to church tonight and that you're hearing about this. You hate this. I mean, it's really a bother to you. In fact, you're a little angry. You can think of a million reasons why a preacher should never talk about this. And let me tell you something. I guarantee you all those reasons are very, very personal. None of them are biblical, but they are very personal because that's where you are. It's your money, and what you give is your business. 30 to 50%, if statistics hold true, national statistics to our congregation, 30 to 50% of the people that call us their church home best relate to that statement. Further, if those statistics hold up, about 25 to 30% of the people who call us their church home best relate to that next statement. How much of my money should I give back to God? Somewhere between a quarter and a third of our congregation, the people who call us church home, are thinking about giving, which is good, but they're still coming at it from a non-converted standpoint, a yet-to-be-converted in this way standpoint. They've yet to really put their belief in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. They really aren't there yet. Then if the statistic continues to hold true, somewhere between 20 to 25% of those who call us their church home, somewhere between a fifth of us and a fourth of us, finally they relate to that next phrase. How much of God's money should I give back to him? Now these folks are followers of Jesus. These folks are becoming disciples, or maybe they're already a disciple, but they're coming to realize that financial control is an illusion. They don't have any financial control in their life. There's wisdom to be had and practices that need to be done, but financial control is an illusion. And what most matters to them is being content and trusting in God for his guidance, for his provision, for both blessings and how God would use them to bless others. Many people think that this is where the journey of spiritual growth and finances ends. But it's not. If you study Acts, if you study the very first Christians and their response to the gospel regarding material wealth, you recognize there is a deeper level still. And that level is identified by the attitude of how much of God's money do I dare keep? This attitude best reflects, even though the one before it also reflects, but this attitude best reflects the truth, the belief that we are merely stewards of what God owns, that we really don't own anything, that what we have is the wealth of God, and the reason that God has given it to us is so that we might be wise with it and good managers of it and being faithful to do his will with it. What good are you doing right now with God's money? What good are you doing with God's stuff? All that stuff he's put in your life, what good are you doing with it? Or have you decided to bury it in your own desires? Now, Christian at the core means being faithful stewards of God's resources, the gifts he has given to us, the time, the talents, the money we've received. To be faithful means we learn to be content, and we have to get serious with our willingness to trust God, as serious as God is with us, trusting us with his money. God has and is trusting you. God has enabled you with resources in your life. God has given you money. He's given you jobs. He's given you savings accounts. He's given you pensions and all kinds of wonderful other things. He trusts you to do good with them, that you would be a blessing to others, that you would acknowledge him in all your ways. And remember, it all belongs to him anyway, and so you would seek him on how best it should be used. Now, we teach a class here called Financial Peace as part of our Core 5 discipleship. And it's 9 weeks long, and it's biblical principles on how to use and save and give money. And one of the more practical and immediate lessons that carries throughout it is this need to be content, to learn to appreciate what we already have and place value upon waiting, upon delayed gratification for something new, a value upon relying on God and being grateful for how God has already provided. And contentment cannot be manufactured. It is purely a spiritual state that takes spiritual practice. And I'll share just one illustration of this general principle of contentment with you. It's called the 10-10-80 principle. It's very, very simple. The idea is that your income is divided into 3 parts. The first part is the tithe, the 10%. It's the first thing to deal with. Off the top, 10% is given to God. Why? So that you remember it all is God's anyway. That's why you give the first 10%. So remember, I got to remember. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. It all belongs to him anyway. Here you go, 10% there. If you aren't, and then the next is this idea of putting 10% back into savings, which is a second priority. And everybody should be saving at least 10%. There's so many biblical examples of this, starting in the Old Testament with Joseph's leadership in Egypt. Saving is part of God's wisdom for us. If you're saving, then you're fulfilling the biblical command. And to be content means that we live on 80%. Not 100%. If we aren't living on 80%, then we are actually living outside of our means. That's what the Bible teaches. We're not being biblical. And if we're not being biblical, then we're subject to consequences of a world that has no wisdom about money and no conscience about money. This means that we have to learn to trust God. A growing trust and confidence of God. A trust for what God can and will do in our life, and also a trust about God's written word. And the wisdom that he intends for us to have about money and wrapping our lives around this wisdom. And sometimes that's hard to accept God's wisdom. It takes trust to take your income and off the top, lop off 10% for God. It takes trust. It takes trust to take another 10% and say, you know what, this is for the future. It's for savings, for retirement, for emergencies, for things that I'll know I need in the future. And it definitely takes trust whatever you are making to live on only 4/5 of it, because that's within your means. The world will not tell you that. Creditors will not tell you this. For the most part, we have a few creditors in our church, and they're the only creditors that I know of that will tell you I'm right and the rest of the world is wrong, because they teach financial peace here, and they know nothing outside the Bible tells us how important this is, but it's absolutely critical that we live this way for financial peace and security. It's God's way. It takes trust to believe that if we give the tithe, that first 10%, the promise of the windows of heaven will open up for us and overflow. Now, that comes from Malachi 3, chapter 3, verses 8 through 10. I don't have time to read it. I'm going to just commend that to you to read on your own. And I'll finish by saying that my life is a testimony to that truth. I'm not a wealthy man. I'm not. Not by American standards, not by a long shot. Now, I'm incredibly wealthy by the standards of Nicaragua or Haiti or Venezuela. In fact, I'm filthy rich by those standards. But even when the context of our culture here in Cherokee County, God's blessings have overflowed for me. And they've come from various sources, one main source throughout my life more than others. And I've had to stay humble to receive God's gifts at times. I've had to lower my pride and allow God to bless me. And God has given me wonderful things over the years, provided all kinds of things that I've had to be humbled to receive them. And in the end, I can tell you that the windows of heaven have opened for me and overflowed. I've tithed since I was 13 years old. I tithe to this day. I think you should tithe, and I can't think of a good reason why you shouldn't. Tithing helps us on our journey of contentment. It is powerful. It's a powerful tool in our desire to both trust God and in how to respond to God's trust of us. Christian to the core means being faithful stewards over the resources in our lives. The biblical tithe is a huge part of how we are good managers of the wealth God has entrusted to us. So why not tithe? Or even be more generous if you're already tithing and enter into the joy of our Master. If you believe there is a God, then you have to believe that one day he will ask you for an account. Jesus told the story. One day he will ask you for an account on what he has given you and how you used it. As your pastor, it's my job to teach you this. As your pastor, I hope that I can lead you and challenge you so that God could say of you, well done. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Let's pray. God, we needed this word tonight. It's been a challenge for us, but we receive it. Wherever we are, we receive it. And we remember the challenge of this series is not to go deep as if we are comparing ourselves with someone else, a certain level that we all have to reach, but rather to go deeper. Wherever we are, take that next step in faith. In Jesus' name, amen.